lecture in the Fawaz trilogy that we have been very pleased to sponsor and support here at MEI this past week. It probably is superfluous to introduce our speaker again, but as you know, he is coming to us from London School of Economics and Political Science. He has many accomplishments. He is a very widely recognized news media commentator. And I think maybe the best thing I could say, and I'll keep it short because we want to get down to the topic of the day, which is the end of America's hegemonic moment in the Middle East, according to our speaker.
Yes. And was a question mark.
Or an exclamation point, perhaps. But let me just point out a couple of things. This is the second edition of Fawaz's book on Obama and the Middle East. It's just come out from, who's the publisher here?
It's Paul Gray and Macmillan.
Okay, Paul Gray and Macmillan. And then here is something that is really quite hot off the press, entitled The New Middle East, Protest and Revolution in the Arab World. Dr. Burgess is the editor of this volume and has contributions from a wide range of very respected Middle East analysts. So it may well become the standard work on the Arab uprisings so far.
It's by Cambridge.
And this is Cambridge University Press. Okay, so those are the books, and here is the author and the speaker, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Really, it's been a pleasure. And thank you again for taking the time for me to come and listen to a probably a nonsensical argument about the end of America's hegemonic moment in the Middle East was a question mark. Why we organized the lecture series in this particular way. In the last 2 days, we focused on the internal dynamics. We focused on the social struggles taking place in the Middle East between Islamists and other social forces, and then we focused on the Arab uprisings broadly defined, in particular the differences between Syria and Egypt and Tunisia in a very simplistic way, because we didn't have the time to flesh out the complexity of the transformations that have taken place today. And I want to focus on the external layer, which is, as you know, it's a very critical layer, in particular America's role in the Middle East. The United States has been one of the most important players, if not the most important player, in internal and regional conflicts since the end of World War II and the beginning of World War in 1947. Really, I would argue that, of course, even at the height of the Cold War, the United States, in terms of military interventions, in terms of direct relations with regional powers, its security umbrella in the Gulf, its special relationship with Israel. If you look at the Cold War, some of the most dangerous moments in the Cold War were basically related to the nuclear alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union. Of course, we all know what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but remember 1967, 1973, and also in a way, the Cuban Missile Crisis had something to do with the Middle East because the Soviets argued that America's deployment of nuclear weapons in Turkey during the Cold War was a decisive factor in the decision by the Soviet Union to basically deploy some nuclear missiles in Cuba as a deterrent force. The end of the Cold War in 1989, in fact, put the United States in it became the America's unilateral moment, a unipolar system. In fact, the first war after the end of the Cold War Gulf War, President Bush talked about the so-called establishing a new world order in which the United States would create a new world order in its own image and would basically decide what are the rules of the game are. In fact, really, 1990, 1991 was one of the most important, probably, political developments in the history of the modern Middle East, for a variety of reasons. We don't have the time to talk about it. In the sense, not only the United States, intervened and expelled the Iraqi army from Kuwait, but the United States decided to deploy for the first time since the end of World War II, to deploy American forces in Saudi Arabia in order to protect and maintain the security architecture in the region. America's deployment of its forces in Saudi Arabia in 1991 had tremendous implications on regional security and international peace. 1991 in particular really was a pivotal moment in the beginning of the birth of the so-called transnational jihadism and Al-Qaeda. Some of you who do not know the nuances of this particular period, up to 1991, Osama bin Laden was in the same tranches as the United States and the anti-Soviet camp. 1991, Osama bin Laden decided to shift camps. He left Saudi Arabia angry. He decided to begin basically his resistance against Saudi Arabia and the United States. In fact, I've written extensively on the birth of what we call transnational jihadist movement, in particular my book, The Far Enemy, Why Jihad Went Global, published in 2005 by Cambridge. In fact, I argue that Saudi Arabia, America's deployment of troops in Saudi Arabia was the catalyst for the beginning of the birth of transnational jihadism. Truly, that was the moment in which Osama bin Laden, he believed that the United States replaced the Soviet Union, the evil empire, as the power that basically was trying to colonize the Arab lands, to destroy the religious fabric of Saudi Arabia. I don't need to, some of you who do not probably have the expertise on Arab and Muslim societies, Saudi Arabia is not just like any other power. Saudi Arabia has tremendous symbolic resonance in the Arab and Muslim world, being basically the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad, the two holiest shrines of Islam. In the eyes of Osama bin Laden, even in 1991, after Osama bin Laden left Afghanistan, his focus throughout, up to 1991, was basically the communist, Marxist, socialist camp, not the Western camp. In fact, in 1990, before America's decision to intervene in Kuwait, Osama bin Laden contacted some princes and sent a specific message to the United States, thanking the United States for basically helping the Mujahideen to expel the Soviet forces from Afghanistan. What I'm trying to say, in a nutshell, and I'm simplifying because, as we said the other day, there is no single factor that really helps us to understand any particular historical moment, that the end of the Cold War, the emergence of the United States as the unrivaled superpower, had tremendous implications for Middle Eastern politics and international security. And in this particular sense, the 9/11 wars also have influenced developments in the region and relations between the United States and the Middle East. And the reason why I want to begin this particular, I want this kind of introduction to contextualize my talk about the American foreign policy in the Middle East in the last 20 years, in particular in the last 6 years. My book focuses on Barack Obama and the Middle East, and how can we understand American foreign policy with the advent, with the coming to power of Barack Obama. And I focus on two questions. I would like to raise two major critical questions and to see whether we can understand where American foreign policy is today and what are the changes, the structural changes, the substantive changes that have taken place in how America interacts with this part of the world. The first question I want to focus on is that to what extent has Barack Obama been able to really shift American foreign policy, that is what I call conceptual shift from his predecessor. That is, has Barack Obama been able to introduce any kind of a new element, any kind of a radical shift in American foreign policy? And in this particular sense, when I say shift, traditional American foreign policy, first the focus on Israel, Israel first policy. This has been a major lens through which America views the Middle East, what we call Israel first lens. The second lens is relations with the oil-producing states. Has Barack Obama been able to really introduce any particular change when it comes to how America interacts with the oil-producing countries? And the war on terror. That is, what's Barack Obama's policy or policies on the war on terror? And the second question is, how high does the Middle East rank on Barack Obama's foreign policy? That is the Middle East important at all for Barack Obama? In light of what has happened in the region since 2010, the beginning of the Arab uprisings, in fact, to what extent America's actions, America's decisions toward the Arab uprising help us to understand the changes that have taken place in American foreign policy? These are the two questions that really basically inform the book. And I don't want to fall into the fallacy of talking about the politics of it. I want to focus on four conceptual questions and see whether we can really make sense of American foreign policy, both in terms of continuity and change. That is, to what extent American foreign policy can be understood in terms of a continuing trend to view the Middle East through a particular set of lenses, or to what extent has been major shifts in American foreign policy. And please remember, I'm simplifying a great deal, and you cannot really talk about Barack Obama without looking at the history, the context of American foreign policy. The first argument I want to make is that Obama's foreign policy in the Middle East has shown more continuity with the past than real change. In fact, while Barack Obama has shifted his conceptual approach from his predecessor, because remember, in a way, 9/11, in fact, did bring a critical conceptual shift in American foreign policy in terms of collective security, in terms of multilateral diplomacy. In fact, the American, as you all know, the international security and economic architecture was set up by the United States and its allies after the end of World War II. What President George W. Bush and the new conservative did after 9/11 were really basically to go it alone, to in fact try to dismantle the multilateral collective security system that was constructed by the United States. But Barack Obama, in fact, if there is one particular point I make in this particular book, Barack Obama's foreign policy can be understood as a return to the pre-9/11 system as opposed to really introducing any major shift in how America views the world. That is, in a conceptual nutshell, Barack Obama's foreign policy, not just toward the Middle East, can be understood as a centrist, realist approach to international politics. Barack Obama boasts about, throughout his presidential election, he says he views his foreign policy as an extension of President George W. Bush Sr. He takes pride in the fact that America's foreign policy is a realist foreign policy, informed by America's national interest, informed by the ideas of collective security, multilateral diplomacy. Again, in a nutshell, if you look at the last 6 years of Barack Obama, and I hope you challenge my very non-original point of view, is that Obama really has tried to retain the status quo with very minor revisions. This is a status quo foreign policy with very minor revisions throughout, not just in the Middle East. This is a centrist, realist foreign policy. Realism, the realist approach, we can easily understand, and this is consistent with, American foreign policy, I would argue, from the end of World War II to the present, with minor exceptions, in particular after 9/11. And when I say realism, what I mean by realism, as you all know, is that understanding. Barack Obama keeps saying we need to understand the limits to American power. That is, America functions within an international system, and America's power is limited by multiple challenges and multiple variables. If you look really, it's only by understanding the conceptual lens through which Barack Obama views the world, one can really make sense of how American foreign policy really has basically performed, whether you're talking about Libya, whether you're talking about Syria, whether you're talking about Egypt and the Arab crisis. I mean, despite all the criticism of Barack Obama's foreign policy on Syria, by the right, by the left, by the liberal, I mean, throughout, particularly the foreign policy establishment, Barack Obama has made it very clear. America's vital interests are not involved in Syria. He will not deploy American boots on the ground because America's vital interests are not directly involved. And thus, Barack Obama has made it very clear he will not intervene directly in Syria because there are limits to America's power inside Syria. Even in Libya, if we go back and really try to understand the debates that raged within the American foreign policy establishment, Barack Obama was consistent that Libya was not vital to America's vital interest, despite, the pressure on Barack Obama, again, by the establishment, in particular by Hillary Clinton. And even when he agreed to basically indirectly intervene in the conflict, he says, quote unquote, the whole idea the United States would lead from behind. It became an anecdote. The Republicans have used the idea America leading from behind. That is, NATO and Arab countries, of course, finance the war itself, but the United States led from behind as opposed to leading the charge against Libya. Even in many theaters in the Middle East, not just, you see a realist centrist foreign policy. What do I mean by realism? I mean by realism the way Barack Obama defines realism. It's a cautious, he says, a cautious, risk-averse and conservative foreign policy. It's a cautious and risk-averse and conservative foreign policy. Of course, some of his critics say it's amoral foreign policy. It's an amoral foreign policy because it basically prioritizes interests, and basically it does not really pay attention to liberal ideas and the ideas of protection and human rights and what the United States, in the eyes of many, stands for, in the sense as being the leader of the free world and protection of certain values in the international system. The second argument in the book I make, and please remember I'm simplifying, but I think the first important conceptual point is that this is a realist foreign policy, not informed by any kind, and this is where the change from his predecessor in terms of the promotion of democratic ideas, institutionalism, at least on the ideological level. There is no such thing. Barack Obama keeps saying, I am not a preacher. The United States is not a preacher. I cannot change the world. The United States has to work within a world defined by limits and realities. The second argument, and this is, again, consistent with American foreign policy for the last 50 or 60 years, is that we cannot understand American foreign policy in the last 6 years without understanding what I call the structural institutional continuity of U.S. foreign policy. That is, the structure, despite sometimes shifts, whether you're talking about either the Kennedy administration or even the Carter administration or the George W. Bush administration, it seems to me that time and again the structure asserts itself in American foreign policy. And what I mean by that is that that more than any region in the world, for some of us who work on the Middle East, presidential policy in the Middle East is basically hampered by institutional, bureaucratic, and domestic politics. Again, I'm not saying anything original here when I say institutional, domestic, and bureaucratic politics. And what I'm talking about really here is that scholars who work on American foreign policy in the Middle East, they talk about the so-called the dysfunctional American political system. The dysfunctional American political system is that institutional and bureaucratic politics play a decisive role in how American foreign policy basically is conducted when it comes more than any region in the world, because of, again, the role of special interest groups and bureaucratic politics and institutional politics. That is, in particular, and here we need, for some of you who are students of foreign policy, I mean, some of us think that somehow the US president has, I mean, tremendous leeway in the way he conducts foreign policy. Yes, the president is very powerful, but we need to understand, we need to take into account what we call the limits on the imperial presidency. And the limits on the imperial presidency, you're talking about the foreign policy establishment, you're talking about the Congress, you're talking about the media, you're talking about lobbies. I don't buy the argument myself is that somehow there's a lobby out there and the lobby determines American foreign policy. I think that the pro-Israel friends and allies are very important in the sense of influencing the debate that rages in America, that there is more to American foreign policy toward the Middle East than just the lobby itself. You're talking about what we call the parameters of foreign policy. You're talking about the media, you're talking about corporate America, you're talking about public opinion, you're talking about the foreign policy as a whole. And the lobbies or the special interests, I mean, their basic task is to influence the parameters by which American foreign policy is constructed. I mean, I think US politicians, what I'm trying to say is that US politicians, including Barack Obama, are trapped in a political culture that basically promotes groupthink and conformity. That is, I mean, when we say the dysfunctional American political system, this particular system views the Middle East through a particular lens, Israel, the so-called the Israel first lens. The fact is that Israel is a democracy. The fact is that Israel reminds many Americans of the notion of the frontier state. Israel is a shining city on a hill. Israel is like us. Arabs are viewed to a large extent through a different lens. And of course, the war on terror and 9/11 have not really helped in basically bridging the divide between, I mean, the first lens and the various historical stereotypes through which the Arab world in particular tend to be viewed. Unfortunately, and this is where some of us are a bit critical of Barack Obama, like his predecessors, Barack Obama has allowed the politician to prevail over the statesman. That is, he really has followed a long-standing tradition of presidential behavior on the Middle East that explains why American foreign policy, why US foreign policy persistently fails when it comes to the Middle East. He has allowed institutional and bureaucratic politics, in fact, to predominate. He has not been able to overcome, to challenge, to defy the dominant narrative in which American foreign policy is made. Let me give you, and this is again a kind of what has happened in the first 9 months of the Obama presidency. I mean, think of how much investment Barack Obama made in the first 9 months. In particular on the Arab-Israeli conflict. I mean, this is a president who's really very genuine. He came to the office with a particular, I mean, grand design. He wanted to basically play a role in ending the Arab-Israeli conflict, in engineering, helping to engineer a settlement between Palestine and Israel, to change the traditional, basically, construction of power politics in the region. And for 9 months, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton really made a concerted effort to basically try to change basically the way American foreign policy is conducted. And you know the debate, I'm not going to bore you with a particular debate, by trying to convince or nudge Benjamin Netanyahu to stop settlements, building Jewish settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. 3 major crises with Benjamin Netanyahu, 3 major confrontations, public confrontations. Barack Obama lost every single confrontation against Benjamin Netanyahu. And the reason why Barack Obama lost the 3 confrontations against Benjamin Netanyahu, because Barack Obama faced tremendous pressure, domestic pressure, by the Congress and what we call the bureaucratic institutional apparatus in the United States. This would have, if Barack Obama wanted to basically prevail over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Barack Obama would have had to invest more political capital at home in order to really prevail over Benjamin Netanyahu. And he would have. I mean, but the fact is, Barack Obama decided not to invest some of his precious capital in trying to really convince Benjamin Netanyahu to change tracks. I mean, again, to simplify, every American president in the Middle East, unfortunately, they view it as a conspiracy. It's nonsense. There is no such thing as a conspiracy. Barack Obama truly was a genuine president who invested considerable energy in trying to bridge the divide between the Palestinians and the Israelis. He failed, not because of a conspiracy, he failed because he thought, he and his advisors, that basically in order to really, make a breakthrough, that he had to really invest more political capital. Every American president has, limited political capital. And his capital had to be invested in his eyes the first 9 months, remember, because Iraq, Afghanistan, and the war on terror. And in this particular sense, they calculated that any major investment on the Arab-Israeli conflict would really basically leave him vulnerable to other portfolios, in particular in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that's why Benjamin Netanyahu said, no, I will not stop the building of settlements on the occupied territories. And basically, he won the argument because Barack Obama failed to take on the structural institutional apparatus that imposes major constraints. Let me give you an idea what I mean by that. On the morning after a major confrontation between Barack Obama and Netanyahu, you all remember that famous incidents in the White House in which President Barack Obama told Benjamin Netanyahu, please, I need an answer from you in 1 or 2 hours. I'm going to have dinner with my family. I want you to tell me whether you are willing to stop settlements on, and basically he left him in the White House. This was a major slap on the face against Benjamin Netanyahu. And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu did not trust Barack Obama. He thought that basically the White House was bugged. So he went to the Israeli embassy. In the morning, he went to meet the congressional leadership, both Republicans and Democrats, on the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning. He went to Capitol Hill, and he met with both Republicans, and the meeting itself was fascinating. Some of major Barack Obama's liberal allies, Nancy Pelosi and Henry Reid. Nancy Pelosi, the first thing she said in a press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, on the morning of the major confrontation between the President of the United States and Benjamin Netanyahu, she said to Mr. Prime Minister, we do not know what you were told last night in the White House about settlement and Israel. But now we want the American public to know, we want you to know, here in the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, speak with one voice. We support your agenda, we support your strategy. If Barack Obama cannot basically gain the support of Nancy Pelosi, the most liberal voice in the US Congress, you could imagine the kind of basically, and Pelosi, and this is, again, we easily, we can simplify and say why, but the reality is the Congress, as you all know, is a major player. And Barack Obama and his allies calculated, well look, if we want to fight a major wage battle in the Congress, that would mean basically taking on not only the Republicans, but also, the most liberal elements in the Congress itself. And it was after 9 months, a major reversal of policy on the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is, as you know, is a critical element in US foreign policy and a fundamental question in the Middle East, despite, the fact now we're talking about the Islamist movement, Syria or Yemen. The fact is, this is essential. I'm not saying it's the most important, but it's one of the most important fault lines in the region itself. Ironically, if you look, the first 9 months, and then after that particular period, a major reversal by Barack Obama on the Arab-Israeli conflict, in particular speech at the United Nations, in which he really articulated the structural institutional argument of the Arab-Israeli conflict. David versus Goliath, Israel faces major, it's a tiny state, vulnerable state. We cannot really let Israel be endangered. That is, what I'm trying to say is that when Barack Obama faced major institutional and bureaucratic hurdles, basically when it came to the Arab-Israeli conflict, Barack Obama behaved like other American presidents. He realized the challenges, he realized the risk, he realized the costs, and basically he moved on. The structure in American foreign policy reasserted itself. And since then, on this particular question on the Arab-Israeli conflict, Barack Obama has tended to really act and conduct himself like other American presidents. The third point I want to make is that despite Obama's lofty rhetoric about a new start of relations with the Arab world and Middle Eastern states, I think in this particular case, the Middle East does not rank very high on American foreign policy. I can't tell you how many times people say, look what Barack Obama is doing in Syria, look at the lack of leadership, look at the lack of what, again, for you, some of you who are interested in foreign policy, we must contextualize all this political reporting and analysis. Why has Barack Obama acted the way he has? Toward Syria, toward Egypt, toward Libya, toward Yemen? The Middle East is not important, is not a priority on the agenda of American foreign policy. This is very important for us to understand, because many of us, including myself, who fully supported Barack Obama, and we, myself and many others, we worked very hard for Barack Obama. We really believe that Barack Obama represents a breath of fresh air, that person who really a liberal president, both in terms of social agenda and foreign policy. I was not the only one. Many of us believe that this American president really would bring about change, not in a rhetorical sense. And when Barack Obama went to Ankara, when he went to Cairo, when he gave the speeches about the new start, about a new beginning, about the fact, we believed him, like many other people. And I think he himself was genuine, but the fact is what Barack Obama was trying to do. He was trying, and again, we need to understand the historical context. Remember, this is a president that basically, came to the White House after, almost 6-7 years of bloody wars in the Middle East, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq. He was trying to repair the damage of what his predecessor exacted on American foreign policy. He wanted to convince Middle Easterners, Arabs, and Muslims that the United States was not that happy, that the United States basically hears their voices, that the United States basically acted in he never apologized for what the United States did in Iraq, but he said the United States should not have gone to Iraq, that Iraq was the wrong move, and what happened. But the reality is, again, if there's another point I really would like you, and I think you know this as well as I do, is that since day one, the American foreign policy establishment made a strategic decision. The United States was too much invested in the Greater Middle East, much more than what its vital interest basically required. That was the decision. In fact, they believe that W. Bush, in fact, overextended America's influence, not just in the Middle East, throughout the world, but in particular in the Middle East. America's vital interests were not as involved as to require major strategic, ideological, and material investment. And they believe, according to the consensus, America's future, quote unquote, lies in the Pacific region and Asia. This was, from day one. The question is for the Barack Obama team, and I interviewed many people around the president, they argued that, in fact, our strategy, our priority is to begin the process of shifting America's strategic and economic interest from the Middle East to this particular theater, the Pacific region. Because America's future in the eyes of the president lies in this particular region, economically and strategically. And the most fascinating thing about really trying to understand Barack Obama's foreign policy, at the end of her 4-year service as a foreign secretary, Barack Obama wanted to basically reward Hillary Clinton, so they appeared on a television show on CBC. And basically, it was the first time ever that the president appears with his departing foreign minister to thank her publicly for her service. Remember, the relationship between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton is a very unique one, given what. So she relayed, it was an interview, very genuine, she said when he basically offered me the position, he told me, look, Hillary, I want you to know that the United States faces an endemic structural economic crisis. I'm extremely worried that the United States the American economy is in a very dismal and very dangerous phase. I want you to know, quote unquote, I'm paraphrasing what Hillary Clinton said at the end of 4 years. I don't have the time and the energy to basically invest in the world as the high expectations of me in America and the world. I don't have the time, I don't have the energy. My time, my priority is to put the American house in order. To put the to really basically engineer an economic renewal, urban renewal, social renewal in America. I want you to be my voice, my eyes. This is yours, because I can invest in this particular, in the international system. If this is not, and this interview, I mean, really everything that I've read, and this interview, for me and for many others, was really eye-opening. Because Barack Obama, for many of us, because we were very much, we believed his speeches, Barack Obama really is a domestic president. He's very much interested. He has a social agenda, an important social agenda. He believes that basically nation building, as he keeps saying, starts at home. Nation building, that we don't have the energy and the resources to really get involved in nation building. That is, foreign affairs, international relations are not a priority, and in particular, for some of us who work on the Middle East is not a strategic priority for this particular president. And that's why, for some of us who look at the Middle East itself, not just about Syria and Libya, even the Arab uprisings. I mean, think, what has the United States really done since the outbreak of the Arab uprising in 2000 and till the present? Think of how little energy and resources the United States has invested in the transition process. And I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about Tunisia, I'm talking about Yemen, I mean, hardly any other political capital or material resources in order to help transitioning Arab societies. And again, it's not just Syria. I'm talking about Libya, I'm talking about Yemen, I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about Tunisia. I mean, you really have to look to say, what's happening here? Where's the United States? Why is the vacuum? In the United States, the Republicans say it's the lack of leadership. Barack Obama's fault. But it's more than that. I think Barack Obama, it's not about Barack Obama's leadership, it's about an assessment of America's strategic interest. That the United States does not have resources, and whatever it has to basically spread the resources near and far. So as a result of this particular criticism, at the end of 2013, a major strategic review of American foreign policy was conducted as a result of the criticism of American foreign policy. And this strategic review was conducted by about dozens of American top officials, including led by Susan Rice. Susan Rice is the national security, the most senior national security advisor to President Barack Obama. And after the review, Susan Rice has given several interviews about the nature of this review and what America. This is just in the last few months. And I think this particular review for us is very important just after my book has come out. And she says, in quote unquote, in one of her interviews, Susan Rice, she says, the goal of the strategic review is to avoid having events in the Middle East swallow Barack Obama's foreign policy agenda worldwide, as the Middle East basically has done so in the past. So they realize the political damage that the Middle East has exacted on Barack Obama's foreign policy. And Susan Rice said, our goal now is to shield the president from the aftershocks, from the repercussions, from the reverberations of the conflicts in the Middle East. And again, in a nutshell, the result, the consensus of this particular interview is that Barack Obama's foreign policy agenda in the Middle East, in the Greater Middle East, is a very modest one, is a very humble one. Susan Rice said two things, two priorities on the agenda for the next 2 years are the nuclear talks with Iran. This is the highest priority portfolio. And the second one is the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. But ironically, after Susan Rice made the statement about the Arab-Israeli conflict, one of the panelists on the review, he said, well, look, the reason why we put the Arab-Israeli conflict in the list, because, well, this is Kerry's thing. John Kerry cares a great deal about and we really had no choice but to basically include it in the strategic review. He said, quote unquote, it's Kerry's thing, what they're trying to say. And we know this, we're not, it does not take an expert to realize that basically Barack Obama has given up on trying to really invest any major capital, political capital in the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's scary, but really has been, you have to respect this man. Think this is the 13 rounds. He just yesterday, he left the meeting between the President and the Pope and went to salvage the talks, the political talks between Mahmoud Abbas and Benjamin Netanyahu. One of the lessons that we have learned about the Arab-Israeli peace talks that without presidential intervention, very little really happens. This is a historical point that we take very seriously. Despite the good efforts, despite the good heart, despite the stamina of John Kerry, I doubted very much that anything would happen without the intervention of the President himself. And the President, in the last 3 years or so, has made a strategic decision to distance himself, because in Susan Rice's words, the Middle East has done enough damage to the President. We want to shield his presidency. We want to make sure that the Middle East does not damage the President's agenda and the President's legacy, quote unquote. And really, if you look at, and that's why it seems to me, if you look at the landscape, at America's in the Middle East, you realize that, how insignificant the Middle East really ranked on the priority list of Barack Obama. And in this particular sense, also some of the review itself, Egypt is no longer a critical, really variable in American foreign policy. Susan Rice insinuated that Egypt is very different. Egypt is very complex. They're trying very much now to keep their distance from Egypt, hardly any statement. Look at 2011, when Barack Obama in May 2011 gave a major speech on the uprising of the State Department. It was a fascinating speech in which he says the United States would use all elements of its power, economic, political, and material resources in order to help in what? In basically promoting the transitional democratic process. In 2013, he said, well, this is too difficult for the United States. There are limits to what the United States could do. True, and of course, there are limits. But I think what I'm trying to say to you is that a major strategic decision has been made at the highest levels. That the Middle East not only is not as important as it used to be, but in fact the Middle East now is a place whereby it might damage the legacy and the presidential agenda, and thus we have to invest less and less political capital and presidential capital in particular. And I think there are two words to really describe American foreign policy toward the Middle East, and I would say pragmatism and diplomacy. And in the sense that this is part of the realist approach, that is, the United States will not use force except to protect its vital interests. This is and that's why I will not put American forces in harm's way unless America's vital interests are involved. And the American public seems to agree with this. Even on Syria, even after Bashar al-Assad allegedly used chemical weapons inside Syria, 70% of Americans said it's not in our interest to intervene in Syria. 70% agreed with the US President. This tells you a great deal about, how exhausted America is after many years of wars, and after the wars have taken their toll on American policy. And to qualify, the highest priority in the use of force is the so-called war on terror. In fact, not only Barack Obama has maintained this war, Barack Obama has escalated America's battle in the war on terror. Worldwide, this is a worldwide. Barack Obama does not take hostages, does not take captives. Barack Obama is, from day one, I want you to do everything in your power to decimate, to dismantle the structures and the networks of the terrorist camps, particularly Al-Qaeda Center. The United States has been waging a relentless war worldwide, and even making Barack Obama was the first president ever to sanction the killing of American citizens because of the threats, alleged threat that they represent to American security. This tells you, because he realizes that this is as a commander-in-chief, I mean, we can talk about it if you have any questions, why the U.S. war on terror, U.S. global war on terror, the war against terrorism, against Al-Qaeda, is so central to America. But what 9/11 means in the American imagination and what have you. That this has been very consistent, and this is, again, the investment that the United States has made. I mean, think when we say Al-Qaeda is a $5 trillion project. Literally. I mean, what the United States has spent, has invested in its war against Al-Qaeda since 9/11 is $4.9 trillion. These are not my numbers, these are the numbers of Brown's University top economists who calculated, in fact, the Iraq cost, and we can talk about what they mean. They mean is that 9/11 was a watershed, a critical watershed in how America perceives, its new enemies. And that's why Barack Obama cannot de-escalate when it comes to the war on terror. And that's why yesterday some of you asked me about Syria, that is the emergence of a Salafi jihadi critical current inside Syria could really shift American foreign policy in the next 2 years in ways that basically the reverse ways that we think of. Whoever believed that, Turkey would use its first, bombing inside Syria, not against the Assad regime, but against members of the Islamic State in Iraq and ISIS. This is, you would expect Turkey to bomb, military targets of the Assad regime. The reverse has happened. Can I imagine a scenario whereby the United States would wage all-out war against, Salafi jihadi elements in Syria? Yes. And this is how bad it is, in particular given the assessments now, the dark assessment by U.S. intelligence services. Finally, and this is why I come to my final argument, is that I think one of the arguments I try to test is that, and really is that, has America reached the end of its hegemonic moment in the Middle East? And I test the hypothesis based on a book by Monroe. It's called The End of Britain's Moment in the Middle East. It was written, she was a fellow at St. Anthony's College. I don't know if you know Elizabeth Monroe. It's a classic text, really. It's a very short text, but she was one of the first, scholars to argue that even though throughout the interwar years Britain remained a dominant power, Elizabeth Monroe argued that, in fact, World War I really, in a way, paved the way for the end of Britain's moment. World War II basically formalized the end of Britain's moments in the Middle East. I think we need to, let me be clear, I'm not suggesting in any way that the United States does not really remain the preponderant economic and military power in the international system. For the next 20 years, the United States will remain the most powerful economic and military power by far, even though America has declined relatively to other powers. This is, what we are seeing now is that the emergence of a nascent international system with multiple centers of power. One of my leading colleagues at the London School of Economics, Fuzan, he argues it's a decentric system with multiple centers of power. What he means by decentric system is that there is no center. There is, like after the end of the Cold War, that is now, it's a system in the making. It's unfolding before our eyes. It's very difficult to really define the nature of this particular international system. But for sure, for one thing sure, is that the United States is no longer the unrivaled superpower. The United States no longer basically shapes world history in the same way that it did after the end of the Cold War. Multiple, and I hope you take the time to take a look at just what I try to argue, is that multiple factors might help us understand why the United States is no longer really is the hegemonic power in the Middle East. The first thing, America's, relative economic and military decline in the international system. The exhaustion that the wars have taken, both in terms of the elite, the public, and the foreign policy establishment. What the Iraq War, the cost that the Iraq War have exacted on American foreign policy in terms of both moral and deterrence, not just moral. And I think the United States, Iraq was, in the words of John Kerry, catastrophic for American foreign policy, both in terms of moral standing and also in terms of material costs. The fact is, the United States invested tremendous material power, and its deterrence wasn't exposed. When you use the emergence of a new geostrategic and geopolitical powers in the region. Think of what has happened in the Middle East in the last 12 or 13 years, whether you're talking about Iran, whether you're talking about Turkey. Let me simplify by giving you a few ideas what I mean by that. But when Barack Obama came to power, the US military establishment and the White House wanted to conclude a security agreement with the Iraqi government in order to maintain a contingent of American forces, with 20 and 30 forces. Even Nouri Maliki basically wanted to sign an agreement with the Americans to maintain a contingent. Could not do so. Nouri Maliki, because tremendous societal and political pressure inside Iraq itself. Again, what I'm trying to say is that the emergence, not only of geostrategic and geoeconomic powers, the emergence of an awakening public opinion. An awakening public opinion that really must be taken within the context of changes within the region itself. Benjamin Netanyahu looks President Barack Obama in the eye and says no, and lectures Barack Obama basically on American television. You are very naive when you talk about peaceful Palestinians. Nouri Maliki, not only he could not sign, he could not really agree to the terms basically that the Americans suggested. In fact, Nouri Maliki, the Americans have been exerting tremendous pressure on Nouri Maliki to slow down the flow of arms and weapons to Syria from Iran, and Nouri Maliki keeps saying indirectly no. In fact, Nouri Maliki now is helping. We have evidence of thousands, a few thousand of Iraqis who basically are traveling to Syria to fight the war inside Syria. Now we have evidence that the Nouri Maliki government itself using multiple channels to help Bashar al-Assad basically to survive inside Syria. This is a country that the United States liberated and investing major resources, blood and treasure in multiple, you have multiple examples. When even Turkey, the way Turkey now interacts with the United States is a testament to the fact that yes, there is a strategic relationship between Turkey and the United States, that Turkey views itself now as an emerging geostrategic and geoeconomic power. Also says the United States, no, multiple. In fact, the way in terms of how Turkey interacts with Israel and the United States is a testament. Look how Iran has acted. And how Iran challenges America's attempts throughout the region. Ironically, multiple examples, really multiple examples show both the rise of geostrategic and geoeconomic powers and also an awakening public opinion that basically limits the ability to exercise power and influence events in the same way that it used to be during the Cold War and after the end of the Cold War. Egypt. Let's take Egypt, a country, very broken country. A country that you might say, of all countries in the Middle East you would expect, Egypt receives $2.1 billion, between $1.8 and $2.1 billion every year from the United States. And when the military basically ousted Mohammed Morsi from the presidency, the United States gently has tried for the last 9 months to convince the military-led government to behave, to act in a gentle way, to be less repressive. The US had the military leaders in Egypt, whether you're talking about Abdel Fattah Sisi or others, listen to the US. What has the United States done? Of course, it has basically withheld some of the military weapons it sends to Egypt, in particular the Apache helicopters, and basically it has withheld about $260 million in aid last year. So what did Saudi Arabia do? Saudi Arabia's decision, we will match not only every penny that the United States, in fact, we will compensate you and more. Saudi Arabia has, in the last 9 months, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait have provided between $12 and $13 billion in aid to Egypt in order to basically convince the United States, or even to allow, empower military leaders to proceed in their repressive campaign inside Egypt itself. I mean, think about Saudi Arabia. Of all the countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia has lashed out angrily against the United States, whether it's Syria. The first visit of the king was to China, making all kinds of noises about, even though this is part of positioning and posturing, but the reality is there are multiple examples to show that is a combination of factors, and I have not really talked very much about the assertion of Russian power, the emergence of China. These powers, are here to stay, as you all know. The Russian foreign policy now, and I'm not talking about a simplistic term, the return to the Cold War, but I think any observer, let alone a scholar of international relations, would realize that the Ukraine is not just a thing of the past. I think the crisis with the Ukraine tells us that in the next decade or so, we're going to see a more assertive Russian foreign policy. And the Middle East is a major player in which both China, Russia, India, and other powers will try to fill the vacuum that has created by American power. Ironically, Nouri Maliki returns from his visit to Washington very angry. The Americans, they did not give him what he wants. So what does, so the Russian delegation goes to Baghdad and says, anything you need, we are willing to provide arms and training. The Americans basically say, we cannot give you all the weapons that we have promised you. The Russian defense minister and foreign minister goes to Cairo and say, anything you want. And Sisi, and they travel to Moscow. You all know the extent of China's now investment. It's in terms in the next few years, China will become the first purchaser of oil and gas from the region, not the United States. The United States does not need any more Middle Eastern oil and gas. And the pivot to the Pacific region, it's not just that the United States is weaker than it used to be. I think there's a strategic decision that has been made in the United States that the Middle East really is no longer as important as it used to be. That is, the future of America lies in that part of the world. In this particular sense, I think we might be seeing the beginning of the end of America's hegemonic moment. It might take 10 years, it might take 20 years, but this really could be a pivotal point. Many of us, we might look back in 20 or 30 years and say, well, like Elizabeth Monroe, that indeed that was a historical moment, tremendous importance in terms of the changing power configurations. I hope I have not given you final tone to conclude. I hope Obama is not responsible for this. Because it's very easy for critics all to say, this Obama, and we don't have the time. I hope when we invite you next year and talk about America's legacy, the historical legacy. No, really, this is part of what I call a long, bitter legacy of America's engagement in the Middle East. It's only by understanding this particular legacy. It's only by understanding basically how the United States has conducted itself over the last 50 or 60 years. America's allies, how America has sacrificed ideas many of us feel very strongly about, and how it basically went to bed with some of the bloody dictators in the region, how it has prioritized basically cynical realism as opposed to a kind of a enlightened realism. Barack Obama would like us to believe that he is really pursuing an enlightened realism. But in the meantime, it's a fascinating period also analytically for many of us to really see this is really a world that's being created before our eyes. And in this particular sense, it's truly an historical moment of tremendous impact on both regional politics and international relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.